Hi there. Welcome to Pallet University and the next episode of our Real Biologist Reacts series, reacting to the art of Joshua Dunlop here on his ArtStation page. The link to which will be down in the description, as well as all of Joshua's other socials. It would really mean a lot to me if you go check him out, because he is such an incredibly talented artist and human being, and such spreading really cool, just positive artistic energy out into the Pokemon community. So it would really mean a lot to me personally if you would go check out all of those links down in the description. Also linked in the description is our Patreon page if you feel like our content is worthy of supporting in that way. I've been putting out sort of weekly. With my class schedule, it gets a little tricky, but I've been trying to put out weekly sort of Patreon exclusive content. So far it's mostly just been me messing around, playing some games with friends. I've had a video of me playing Among Us with some friends. I played Fall Guys with one of my friends on there. As well as me playing the beginning, at least, of Super Mario Sunshine for the first time ever. So those videos are on Patreon, and they're available at every tier, starting as low as $2. As well as I'm going to be putting up some more educational type content on Patreon as well. Starting with the next video that's going to be up on Patreon is me sort of playing through parts of the game Spore, the classic evolution simulator type game, and sort of critiquing their evolution mechanics, I guess, from a real person who studies evolution for a living. So if you're excited for that kind of content, please, it would really mean a lot if you would at least check out the Patreon link down in the description as well. Alright, so with that, let's just get into the actual content of this video. And so I'm going to be honest with you, this is the fourth time I've tried recording this video. So I recently updated my OBS, and I guess it reset a couple of my settings, including whether or not it was actually recording my mic, because I could see the levels in OBS, but it was not recording. It took me I couldn't figure out why it was not actually recording the mic, but now I figured it out. So just sort of due to a time crunch, we're only going to be talking about Farfetch'd today, because I wanted to get this video out today. So also, if you have not seen the previous episode in this series where I talk about the Pidgeot line, there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but I'm going to talk about some different bird things than I did in that video. So if you saw that video, great, you're going to learn more about birds. If you didn't, definitely please go watch it after this, because I'm going to be sort of referencing some things that I talked about in that video, in this video. The link to that video will be up in the cards that way, as always. But this episode's probably only going to be Farfetch'd, just so I can get it out in time today. And then on Saturday, because on Friday, I'm going to be streaming my playthrough of the Crown Tundra as well. It's because I don't really have anything going on Friday, so I'll probably start that at around 10 or 11 a.m. on Friday, and be playing through that until I finish it. Potentially doing some Dynamax adventures with viewers and or friends. So we'll see. Definitely keep an eye out for that as well. And then on Saturday, I'll have out some another episode of this series. Anyway, Farfetch'd. So I talked a lot about birds of prey in the Pidgeot line video, because that's mostly, even though their name is sort of derived from pigeon, they're really not based off of pigeons at all. Pidgey a little bit, but definitely not Pidgeotto or Pidgeot. And Farfetch'd, as you can very clearly tell, is a duck. However, other than probably Hawlucha and probably Sirfetch'd, which falls in the same categories, Farfetch'd is probably the most anthropomorphized bird that we have, in that it is bipedal while also having its spine upright, which only humans and our very close relatives, such as Australopithecus, Neanderthals, other closely related hominins, have done. Anything else that is done bipedalism did it the correct way and kept their spine more or less horizontal, which is why humans have infamously bad backs. Anyway, humans being garbage aside. So Farfetch'd is quite anthropomorphized, but Joshua did a really good job of making it very clear that this is a bird, but also giving it really good bird features that I'm going to talk about. So first we're going to start with the head. So waterfowl have a really distinctive head, in that a lot of other birds have, specifically birds of prey, have rather slender beaks that come in a sort of curve to a point, whereas waterfowl have very flat and somewhat elongated. There are definitely birds that have longer beaks than waterfowl do, but they're flat and somewhat elongated, and then they have this little bulb at the end that usually comes to like a little point, a little bit more of a point than is shown here. And that's mostly just for helping them grab like seaweed or like other aquatic vegetation in like the ponds and lakes and things that they live in. But that's very, very sort of diagnostic or particular to waterfowl, as well as I don't know the actual like anatomical terminology of this little thing here. I'm positive that it does have a name, and I will try to put it in post if I remember what that's actually called, but just due to time constraints, I'm not going to look it up right now. Also, the eyes are pretty diagnostic as well. Waterfowl tend to have pretty beady eyes compared to a lot of other birds, and beady in that their pupil is just ginormous. It is absolutely huge. Like, it takes up almost all of the eye. And, you know, while I don't believe any birds really have a noticeable sclera, you know, like the white part of your eye, they do have it. I think it's just not the external part of their eye. I think it's like the part of the eye that's covered. But their pupil is absolutely huge. And then most waterfowl, well, I'd say most ducks. There's a lot of geese that don't have any kind of head ornamentation, but a lot of ducks do, particularly males. Male birds, yeah, birds probably exhibit the most sexual dimorphism of any vertebrate group. With, I guess, yeah, probably mammals coming in the second most. But there's also a lot of sexually dimorphic non-bird reptiles as well, because birds are reptiles. And, but it's, I don't think that Farfetch'd is sexually dimorphic in the, like, head feathers here. Either way, I'm glad that he chose to actually make them feathers instead of, I think on Farfetch'd it's just like the three sort of lines, similar to how Psyduck is. But I'm glad he decided to actually make them feathers. And then, because birds do not have eyebrows, Joshua decided to integrate this like eyebrow thing just into the feather pattern of the head, which I really appreciate and think that was a really good choice. Let's see, what else? So he did a really good job of really emphasizing the pectoralis muscles. And no, I'm not talking about boobs. Birds do not have like breasts. They have the pectoralis muscles, which are the muscles in the chest area. And so if you've ever eaten like chicken breast, that's these muscles, the pectoralis muscles. And that is how birds fly, basically. So in the history of life on Earth, there have been 4 groups to achieve like powered flight, you know, non-gliding powered flight. And they're insects whose like biomechanics I don't really know that well, so I'm not really going to talk about them. Then was the first vertebrates to do it were pterosaurs, which do things sort of similar to birds, but not quite. Then birds, then bats. Birds and bats and pterosaurs function very differently, and I'll talk about why in a minute here. But since we have a bird in front of us, that's what we're going to focus on here. So birds actually have an extra bone in their sort of shoulder area called the coracoid. That's like attached sort of to their scapula, their shoulder blade. And basically, that's a bone that mammals have lost. It's not something extra that birds gained. It's just that mammals used to have one and then no longer do. But basically how birds fly is these giant pectoralis muscles contract, and that's what pulls your arms from like the sides or the back to the front. That's what your pectoralis muscle does. And instead of like mammals, where mammals have sort of some of your shoulder muscles as well as a little bit of some of the back muscles are what take your arm from the front to the back. Birds have those same muscles, but they're not nearly as important in that motion as is a particular tendon that they have called the Supracoracoideus that basically acts as a rubber band. So when they move their wing down in the downstroke of their flight, that stretches that rubber band. And so instead of having to flex another muscle to move their wing backward, they just loosen that pectoralis muscle. And so it is extremely, extremely efficient. And ducks are probably some of the most efficient flyers of all birds, which is really saying something. Because if you've ever seen a duck fly, they fly very, very fast, very, very long distances, and they can fly all day. Whereas something like a bird of prey, like a hawk or an eagle, they are much less flappy than a duck. And that's not a technical term, that's just my own term. So if you watch a duck fly, they fly particularly with the end of their wings, where they flap them very, very quickly. And that goes into some of the stuff with the feathers that I'll talk about in a little bit, that I talked about quite a lot in that Pidgeot video. But with birds of prey, they basically just hold out their wings and get as much surface area as they can to avoid flapping their wings as little as possible. Because they use different feathers more heavily than ducks do, whereas ducks try to fly as fast and as long as possible. And because of that, they use different feathers for different things. So birds have 3 types of flight feathers. There's the tertiary feathers, which are like right here. They provide a little extra surface area, but not a ton. But they're basically just less important secondary feathers. So these secondary feathers are about, I think, here. These are the feathers that provide lift, like in an airplane. However, unlike an airplane, birds do not have an engine, and therefore need to get their forward thrust from somewhere else. So that comes from the primary flight feathers, which are the ones that provide thrust or forward motion, which is why ducks fly so darn fast, because they flap mostly just the ends of their wings very, very quickly. And because of that, they have a ton of forward thrust and would fly so darn fast. So that's how ducks fly. But I also want to talk about some of the stuff in the actual bone structure of the bird wing because of this particular choice right here. So birds have the same bones in their wings that you do in your arm. They're just a little different. So their humerus, this bone here, and then their radius and ulna, the forearm bones, are basically the same. They don't have as good of a range of motion like this as you do. They cannot, this is called pronating and supinating your wrist. They can't really do that. So they still have this bone, their humerus, and they have their radius and ulna. And then birds fuse a lot of their bones because it allows them to get rid of some of the bones, but still have it be just as strong. So they fuse up a lot of the bones in their wrist to provide structural support while having less weight. And then it's actually very common in animals for them to just sort of lose some bones if they don't need them anymore. So for example, in animals with hooves, the default vertebrate number of digits is 5. The very, very early ones that, like, when they first were coming out of the water, some of them had 8, but very, very quickly they settled on just 5. So things with hooves, however, lose most of these. So for example, things with 2 hooves, like cows, goats, sheep, deer, they lose digit 1, digit 2, and digit 5, the pinky. So they have these fingers here. So they walk like this, using these 2 fingers here. Horses lose everything but digit 3. I'm not going to flip off my camera, but they lose all of them except for the middle one. Whereas their closest relatives, the rhinos, lose digit 1 and digit 5. So they have these 3, and they walk on these 3. However, if you noticed, they always lose things from the outside in. And until recently, I'd always been taught that that's what birds did as well. So birds still have their digit 1, their thumb, and it's just this little tiny bone, like right here, but it has this feather that is attached to it, and I'm pretty sure it's called the Alula bone in birds. So this is called the alular feather, which is why I think it was a really good choice for him to draw this feather holding the leek. But other than that, I'd always been taught that birds retain digits 2 and 3 and fuse them together. So bird, like hands sort of look like this, where they keep this sort of separate, and then these two are fused. But I'm actually taking sort of a like anatomy for paleontologists basically class right now. And while this is still the prevailing theory, some new evidence is suggesting that they actually keep digit 1, the thumb, lose digit 2, and instead keep the pinky. So it looks sort of like this, and then they fuse those, which is super weird. Because, like I said, every other instance of losing things, whether it's fingers, toes, or even teeth, because there's a lot of animals who don't have the same number of teeth as you do, they lose things from the outside in. So you will never see, for example, an animal that is, if it has teeth, it has a first molar, because that is sort of the inside tooth. It might not have the third or fourth molar, or third or second molar, and it might not have the first, second, or third premolar, but it will almost always have the fourth premolar and the first molar. Almost always, if it has teeth at all. But, so having this, if that's true, if they keep sort of, basically if they lose digit 2 and digit 4, that would be the only instance that I've ever heard of. Like, not even that, like, I know of, that I've ever even heard mentioned before. So if that's the case, that's super cool. And as I mentioned a lot in that Pidgeot video, birds are just super weird. So that wouldn't surprise me all that much, but it would still be a little odd. Anyway, moving on from the wings. As I mentioned in that Pidgeot video, tail feathers are also very important in that they generally act as like the rudder. So they sort of get lift and thrust from their wings, but they steer with their tail feathers. And if you've ever seen a duck, they don't really have like the nice fan of tail feathers that you see in like a hawk or an eagle. Instead, they have this sort of bunch of short, like flight type feathers. So I would have to think that they fly, or that they steer also using their wings, but I don't really know that for sure. That's purely speculation on my part. But it also makes a lot of sense for them to have these big old thighs, because you know, when you eat like drumsticks or something that's probably from a chicken or a turkey, which makes sense because they're like ground birds. They technically can fly, but they are not all that good at it and spend most of their time on the ground, so they need bigger leg muscles. Ducks are really bad at walking, but when they swim, they kick their feet really hard and quite fast. So they need these big old leg muscles as well. And the only critique really that I have is that while Farfetch does not have like claws on its toes, real ducks definitely do. So that might be something that I would have added if I were Joshua, but I also understand sticking to the source material as well. Alright, so that is going to do it for this video. Like I said, sorry it was only one Pokemon, but Farfetch is kind of a weird standalone Pokemon anyway. So like I said, keep an eye out on Friday for me streaming the Crown Tundra, as well as on Saturday for the next video in this series. Thank you so much once again to Joshua for just letting me make these videos, letting people talk about and you know, make content about your art, and also just for putting out all this incredible material into the Pokemon community. Make sure to check out all of Joshua's links, like I said at the beginning, down in the description. Make sure to follow me on Twitter as well to keep up on all things Pokemon science. And also in the description is the link to my Patreon, like I mentioned at the beginning. It would really mean a lot if you would at least check it out, you know, give it a look. Lots of really interesting content going to be going up there somewhat soon. And I want to give a massive shout out to our first ever patron, Patty Murphy. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, there's a time and place for everything.